Today brings us to John chapter 11. John chapter 11, one of the greatest miracles that Jesus did is contained there. It also contains a great tragedy. But Jesus purposely allowed for this tragedy. So, part of what we want to try to answer today in today's sermon is the question that a lot of people have in the world. Why does God allow bad things to happen? Why does He allow tragedies to happen when He could have stopped it? And Jesus says it's very obvious that He could have stopped this tragedy in John 11, but He did not on purpose. In Zechariah chapter 13, verse 9, you don't have to turn there. I'll try to read it quickly. Zechariah 13, verse 9. God says to Israel, He says, "And I will bring the third part through the fire, and will refine them as silver is refined, and will try them as gold is tried. They shall call on my name, and I will hear them. I will say, it is my people, and they shall say, the Lord is my God." There are other references too in the Old Testament that speak of God's people going through a refining fire and becoming more pure, just as silver is refined in the fire. I tried to do some research on this yesterday, and I watched a whole YouTube video of a guy in the States somewhere. It looked like in his own backyard, or maybe it was his business, but in some kind of garage, and then outside, he had his own kind of homemade furnace. And he said, "Well, I have some kind of waste material here. It contains in it some old film, and I know that there's silver in there. I want to get the silver out." And so this half-hour video shows the process of how he gets the silver out of this, looks like just rusted, nasty, corroded metal in this bucket in big brown pieces. It took several steps to do it. It took a lot of heat and a lot of fire. Well, he had his own little homemade furnace, and the way he talked, he sounded like he really knows what he's talking about. Maybe he's a scientist even. I don't know. But he was really up on the chemicals and what reacts with what, and how to get the iron out of the silver and the lead out of the silver. And so it went through several stages of heating up and melting this material to try to get the silver. And he had to do this 3 or 4 times at least, until finally at the end of the process, he had a chunk of silver about what would fit in my hand. And it was pure silver. But the heat that it took was amazing, because inside the furnace, he had the materials that he was melting were in this kind of an urn, kind of a vase-looking material, looking shape. But it was made out of something that could take more heat than the silver could. He explained what it was, but again, I'm not up on this. He sounded like a scientist. But when he took this this container out of the furnace, of course he used special instruments so he doesn't burn himself. The container was glowing like white hot. It was bright yellow, glowing. He took it out of there, and then it pours it into this other metal container to let it cool. That took a lot of heat, and they had to do it several times. But this is, as the Bible uses this illustration, this is a very good illustration for sometimes what we feel like we're going through. We feel like we're going through something that is just tearing us apart. It's melting us down. It's destroying us. But we find that in the end, actually, it was for our good. In the end, when this all cools down, we have that pure silver that's very valuable, very heavy. Tragedy develops our faith. How does tragedy develop our faith? Well, first of all, it tests your faith. Puts your faith to the test. This is how God, He tests people and God refines people, is not by giving us everything we want and making life very easy, but by the opposite. By letting us go without things. By allowing life to be very difficult for a time. That's how He develops us. So we get into John chapter 11. And in fact, let's read right now verses 1 through 6. John 11, 1 through 6. Now a certain man was sick, named Lazarus, of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. It was that Mary which anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore his sister sent unto him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom thou lovest is sick. When Jesus heard that, he said, This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. When he had heard therefore that he was sick, he abode 2 days still in the same place where he was. Let's now take a look at the reactions of 3 different people in this passage. We see that Jesus hears Lazarus is very sick, but Jesus purposely delays his coming. Let's see how Thomas reacts to this situation. Verses 7 through 9. Then after he saith to his disciples, Let us go again into Judea. His disciples said unto him, Master, the Jews of late sought to stone thee, and goest thou thither again? Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours in the day? If any man walk in the day, he stumbleth not, because he seeth the light of the world. Well, let's continue reading what Jesus said. Verse 10, But if a man walk in the night, he stumbleth, because there is no light in him. These things said he. And after that he said unto them, Our friend Lazarus sleepeth, but I go that I may awake him out of sleep. Then said his disciples, Lord, if he sleep, he shall do well. Howbeit Jesus spake of his death. But they thought that he had spoken of taking rest and sleep. Then Jesus said unto them plainly, Lazarus is dead. Verse 16, let's get to Thomas' reaction. Then said Thomas, which is called Didymus, unto his fellow disciples, Let us also go, that we may die with him. So very early in the story, we find out that Lazarus has indeed died. Jesus could have gotten there sooner, but he purposely did not. Now, when Jesus says, we've delayed a couple of days, but now we're going to go. We're going to Judea. The disciples react, Jesus, we can't go there. Last time we were there, they tried to stone you. But Jesus made it clear that he is going to Judea. How did Thomas react to that? Well, Thomas is usually known as being Doubting Thomas. Remember, he's the one that wasn't there when Jesus appeared to the disciples after his resurrection. And he didn't believe that Jesus had come later. He believed. Well, here he has kind of a fatalistic or pessimistic outlook. He says, okay, we'll go and we'll die with him. Lazarus has died. Most likely Jesus will be stoned if we go there. So let's do it. We're disciples of Jesus. We follow him wherever he goes. I guess this is it. It's all come down to this. We're going to Judea and we're going to die. Well, oftentimes, when you're in that refining fire, you feel like this is it. I'm going to die. I'm not going to make it. I'm never going to get out of this. My life is ruined. And that's exactly how Thomas felt. Didn't see any way out. Didn't see how things could end well. He saw only how things could end very badly. Well, Jesus is still working with Thomas. He's still developing his faith. Let's take a look at another person and how they reacted to what's going on. Here we have one of Lazarus' sisters. We can start in verse 17. Then when Jesus came, he found that he had lain in the grave 4 days already. Now Bethany was nigh unto Jerusalem, about 15 furlongs off. And many of the Jews came to Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. Then Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him. But Mary sat still in the house. Then said Martha unto Jesus, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. But I know that even now, whatsoever thou wilt ask of God, God will give it thee. Jesus said unto her, Thy brother shall rise again. Martha saith unto him, I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said unto her, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Believest thou this? She saith unto him, Yea, Lord, I believe that thou art the Christ, the Son of God, which should come into the world. How does Martha react here? She says, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. She really believed that. That if Jesus had not delayed or had somehow been closer to them, been able to come earlier, she believes Jesus would have healed him and Lazarus would not have died. Is she blaming Jesus here? Well, it's hard to say. But we see that she knew 3 things. Even in the face of tragedy, that the worst thing has happened. Her brother didn't get well and he died. The first thing she knew was that Jesus would have been able to save him, but he chose not to. But Martha didn't know why. The second thing she knew was that Jesus can do anything that he wants to do. He has unlimited power. Even now, Jesus could do whatever he wanted to do. But what will Jesus do? That she still didn't know. The third thing that she knew was that Jesus will raise Lazarus from the dead someday. She perhaps was a bit disappointed in Jesus, but she had not fallen from the faith. She had not completely lost her faith here in this situation. And that's important to note. In the midst of her grief, in the midst of the things that she knows that are true, Jesus could have come earlier, he could have saved him, he did not. But she still knew that he has the power to save him, to raise him from the dead someday. He has the power to do anything that he wishes to do. In the midst of tragedy, or in the midst of whatever this difficult thing that has come into your life, you don't know why God allowed it. But you probably do know that God is all-powerful and that he could have stopped it. He could have prevented this from happening, or that person doing that to you. But he didn't. He allowed it to play out. He allowed it to happen. You don't know why Jesus did this or why he did that. But most important is that, like Martha, even though God didn't do what you wanted, what you hoped, that you still have faith in him. You still believe in him. You see, then it's possible that the furnace will make you stronger and not destroy you. What about Mary? Mary reacted differently than Thomas or than Martha. Thomas believed there's no way out. This is it. We're all going to die. Martha didn't know why Jesus didn't come earlier, but she still believed in him. Mary, we see, reacted very emotionally. Let's take a look at verses 28 through 38. And when she had so said, she went her way and called Mary, her sister, secretly, saying, The Master is come and calleth for thee. As soon as she heard that, she arose quickly and came unto him. Now Jesus was not yet come into the town, but was in that place where Martha had met him. The Jews then, which were with her in the house, and comforted her, when they saw Mary, that she rose up hastily and went out, followed her, saying, She goeth unto the grave to weep there. Then when Mary was come where Jesus was, she saw him. She fell down at his feet, saying unto him, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews also weeping, which came with her, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. He said, Where have ye laid him? They said unto him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. Then said the Jews, Behold how he loved him. And some of them said, Could not this man, which opened the eyes of the blind, have caused that even this man should not have died? Jesus therefore, again groaning in himself, cometh to the grave. It was a cave, and a stone lay upon it. Unlike Martha, her sister, Mary was not able to hide her feelings. She was not really able to hold everything in. It all came out. First, Mary didn't even come to see Jesus. She stayed in the house while her sister went to do the polite thing and go to meet Jesus. Mary just wasn't ready. And when she finally did come out, she still broke down completely with the same statement that Martha had. Jesus, if you had come, my brother wouldn't have died. And the Bible says that Jesus watched her there weeping, and all the people that had come, assuming that she was going to the grave to mourn her brother, they were all weeping with her. She was fallen down to the ground before Jesus. And in the middle of this, even Jesus started to show his own feelings. Here we have, many children know this to be the shortest verse in the English Bible. Jesus wept, verse 35. Their favorite memory verse. They hope to get as many points for that as for these longer ones. Jesus wept. And the people watched and said, wow, Jesus really loved him. But there's some interesting words here talking about how Jesus, what he was feeling. It says that he was groaning within himself and he was troubled. This groaning within himself is usually connected with anger in the Bible. And so we see Jesus angered and troubled by what he's seeing. How do we explain that? And finally, he was weeping as well. When Jesus walks into this situation where people are crying, people are brokenhearted, they miss their brother, Jesus sees all this. This is the result of sin. You realize that according to Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3, unless sin had entered into the world, there would never have been death and crying and sorrow and sickness. None of this would have ever happened. But sin has come into this world. This world is now cursed by sin. Jesus sees this. This is the enemy. This is the effect that sin has had on the world and on his creation. He groans within himself. He's angry about this. He's upset by it. He doesn't like it. And in the midst of everyone else crying, Jesus sheds tears as well and begins to weep. He's so moved by this situation. If you think that, or if you feel in the midst of tragedy, you feel sadness, anger, you feel these powerful feelings, you need to know that God feels them as well. Jesus does as well. You need to know that you're not the only one brokenhearted. You're not the only one hurting. You're not the only one having feelings of anger that you want to go out there and set everything right. That's exactly how God feels. And we feel those same things because we are created in the image of God. We are sort of like a mirror image of God. The feelings that He has are the feelings that we often have. The question is, what do we do with those feelings? We read earlier from 2 Corinthians chapter 4 that Paul said, we are distressed, but we don't despair. I'll just take a look at that again. He says, we are troubled on every side, yet not distressed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Cast down, but not destroyed. Being a human being means that you're going to go through these times. You're going to go through these troubles. But how do you react to it? Do you just crumble underneath the weight? Do you shatter into pieces? Or do you allow God to melt you down in His refining furnace so that in the end you can come out as pure silver? 1 Thessalonians 4:13. I'll try to turn there quickly. 1 Thessalonians 4:13, but I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning them which are asleep, that ye sorrow not, even as others which have no hope. The Bible doesn't say that we should never sorrow or be sad. But it says it doesn't make sense for us to sorrow and be sad like those who have no hope. This John chapter 11 is a great chapter about the resurrection. Jesus says, I am the resurrection. I can raise anyone I want to. I can raise myself from the dead, as we see that He will. We are not to sorrow as those who have no hope, who have people out in the world, their only hope is what they will experience in this life. That's it. I just can't understand. We've spoken to several people at the door-to-door that call themselves atheists recently. And they seem to truly believe that this life is it. This is all there is. What joys and what achievements we can accomplish in this brief time that we're here, this is it. That's their whole hope. Maybe to leave something behind for our children and grandchildren. But then it's over. Well, if things really go wrong in this life and you don't see a way out, that would be crushing if this life is it. You say, I had one shot and this happened. It's over. That's it. But the Bible says we don't sorrow as those who have no hope. We're going to be sad. It's going to happen. but we know that there is a life after this life. There is something after death. And we are laying up treasures, not that we can have next year or in 10 years, but we're laying up treasures that we will enjoy for all of eternity in the next life. Mary was very sad. Her feelings were out there for everyone to see. She couldn't hide it. But did she sorrow as one who has no hope? Here we see 3 reactions to tragedy, to tests of faith. Tragedy will develop your faith because it adds to your faith patience. James 1, 3 and 4. This passage kept coming to mind all through studying out John chapter 11. James 1, 3 and 4. Knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. But let patience have her perfect work, that ye may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing. James is talking about the same process going through the furnace. Trials and temptations, as he calls them in English. I think kiusatuset was the Estonian word there. These are going to happen. God is going to let them come your way. And they're going to be good for you. They're going to add to your faith patience. You're going to develop your faith. Jesus gives what we find at least 3 reasons why God would allow this terrible thing that he allowed here in John chapter 11. First of all, very early, we already read this. In John 11 verse 4, for the glory of God. It says, when Jesus heard that, he said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby. Jesus had said concerning the blind man, back in chapter 9, verse 3, he said, neither hath this man sinned nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. Jesus knew somehow that everyone's best interest here would be that Lazarus would die and that Jesus would raise him from the dead. This would bring great glory to God. Jesus had decided at that moment, in that place, with these people, to show his glory. However, the family of Lazarus, the friends of Lazarus, they would mourn and they would suffer because of the temporary death of Lazarus. But it was all for the glory of God. You and I, we are not able to see the big picture like Jesus sees, like God sees. There's some great books written by Elisabeth Elliot. If you're familiar with who she is, you know that her husband, Jim Elliot, along with 4 other very young missionaries, had gone to Peru, into the jungles, to make contact with these primitive Stone Age living native peoples deep in the jungle, had no contact with the outside world. And when they did finally make contact, they were killed by these natives. They were known to be a very violent tribe. Well, Elisabeth Elliot then, she had the opportunity to write about these things and to share with the world her thoughts and her experience and more the background of who these men were and what this was all like. And I remember reading one of her books. She explained that why did God allow this to happen? All 5 of these very young women lost their husbands. There were several children that lost their fathers that day. Why did God allow this to happen? He said, well, it's common knowledge now that many people have, and this happened in the 1950s, I believe, so many people have dedicated themselves to the Lord. Many people have gone to foreign mission fields, inspired by the story of the sacrifice of these 5 men. But then she added, but we don't always know the reason why God allowed something. She said, in fact, there's some things that we probably will never know why this side of heaven. We'll never know why God allowed that. We'll never know why God didn't prevent that from happening to you or to your children or to someone you care about. She said, but we have to accept that we don't always know. And indeed, there may have been something that's happened to you or is happening to you, and you've never figured out why. How has this helped anyone in any way? Why would God do such a thing, allow such a thing? You might never know why. But a mature faith is able to say, I don't have to know why. I just have to trust God that He's going to do the right thing always. God allows these trials to come into your life for His glory. Secondly, He allows them to come into your life for the developing of your faith. Verses 14 and 15. Then said Jesus unto them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there, to the intent you may believe. Nevertheless, let us go unto him. Jesus said there, I want you to believe. I want your faith to increase. I want your faith in me to grow. What is the point of the Gospel of John? Well, it's in chapter 20, verse 31. But these are written that ye might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing ye might have life through his name. The raising of Lazarus from the dead is the 7th and final sign in the Gospel of John. Maybe you're familiar with the Gospel of John, that there's 7 signs contained in there between chapters 2 through 11. The first one being Jesus turning the water into wine. This is the 7th, final, and greatest sign that Jesus gave to Israel. That he is the Messiah, the Son of God. The greatest sign, aside from Jesus' own resurrection, of course. It's the greatest sign because the more that we suffer, the greater is God's work in our hearts. Who are the strongest Christians in the world? Why, I would guarantee that it's not Americans living in a well-to-do suburban community neighborhood, having well-paid jobs and everything that they want. That's not where you're going to find the strongest Christians in the world. Where are you going to find them? You're going to find them in the darkest places in the world, where there's real persecution, where there's real risks in coming to church, meeting secretly to worship Jesus. That's where you'll find the strongest Christians who have faced every fear, where the pastor there has been at least once or twice in prison for preaching the Bible. That's because the greater the suffering, the greater God's work in your heart. James says we should be thankful for these trials and temptations. Count it all joy when they come to you. Hard to understand that unless we realize the point of these trials and temptations. And thirdly, Jesus says it is for a witness to the unbelievers. In verses 41 and 42, it says, "Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead was laid, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, 'Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me, and I knew that thou hearest me always, but because of the people which stand by I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me.'" The third reason for allowing tragedies is to be a witness to unbelievers. We might as well read those last verses here of the resurrection, verses 43 and 44. "Then, and when he thus had spoken, he cried with a loud voice, 'Lazarus, come forth.' And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin. Jesus saith unto them, 'Loose him, and let him go.'" This final sign was not only for the sake of Jesus' disciples and those who were following him to increase their faith, it was also to be a witness to those who did not believe. And what was the result? In verse 45, it says, "Then many of the Jews which came to Mary and had seen the things which Jesus did, believed on him." And verse 46 tells us that not everyone believed, but many did. Because this was his final and greatest sign, aside from his own resurrection at the end of the book. In order to grab people's attention, sometimes God will allow us. He will allow our light to shine brighter. Allow something to happen. Now, I've got a very simple illustration here. I just brought a candle with me today. But I'm going to light it so maybe we'll remember. I'll put it where you can see. So a candle only gives light if it's burning, right? We know that. It's the candles that have never burned are like these up here. These are nice and perfect and pretty. They've never been burned. The wick is white. And, it makes a nice display. But this candle has been burned before. You can see that wax has run down the sides. There's some wax down here. For the light to burn, the wick at the end has to be on fire. And the wax itself is burning away, is melting. It only gives light if that's happening. We're actually slowly destroying this candle by having it burn. If we never burn it, it stays up there nice, maybe for 100 years. But allowing it to burn, probably by the end of the day, it would be completely burned down to nothing. Just a pile of wax, a pool of wax in the bottom. The way that God often can get the attention of others, aside from bringing some kind of a trial into that person's own life, but for our testimony to burn more brightly, it's often necessary that our faith be put to the test. It's often necessary that others can see us not keeping our faith when everything is going well. That's not so powerful a testimony. But people seeing that we still believe and trust in God when things are not going very well, when we're burning, when we're slowly being melted down. This has happened and that has happened and that has happened, but you still believe in God. yes, I still believe in God. That is a powerful testimony. And the result was that many did believe in Jesus that day who had not believed in him before. Who minutes before were saying, couldn't this man have come earlier and healed him just like he healed that blind man? Now they were believing that he is the Christ, the Son of God. Tragedy develops our faith. Usually the big question is why? Why is God doing this? Why is God allowing this? Why didn't he stop it? God allows us to go into the fiery furnace to melt us down so that the result will be that we will have a more pure faith. We will be stronger. We will be like that little block of silver that man got at the end of the video. It's very heavy, it's pure, and now you can finally see that it is indeed silver. It's not mixed with anything else. And it's very valuable. Tragedies will test your faith, and they will add to your faith. Patience. Let's commit ourselves to stand strong in the midst of whatever the next tragedy comes to our lives.